You've heard it said, health is wealth, so enrich your life with the Healthy Home Hour, brought to you by the Healthy Home Market, every Sunday, 9 to 10 a.m. Know what's new and classic for health and wellness. Meet the local and national experts. Live God's plan to thrive, not just survive. I'm your host, Holly Adams, and welcome to the Healthy Home Hour. Good morning, health seekers. Thanks for being here this Healthy Home Hour, where today, like every Sunday at 9, we're talking about your health, how to build foundational health, and how to maintain it in our busy and hectic world. This hour, we have an icon of wellness education, Jolie Root, nurse, nutritionist, educator, and radio personality on WVNG New York and WWNN in South Florida. And Jolie has a blog. It's called Red Wine, Green Tea, and Dark Chocolate. It's a great blog, and Jolie's here to talk about the bedrock of a solid nutrition program including vitamin D and the omega-3 essential fatty acid for joint health, eye health, allergies, depression, and lots more. Jolie's senior educator at Carlson Nutrition Supplements, a family-owned and operated supplement company since 1965. 50 years now. So stay with us. Keep it locked right here on Streets 1033 for some news about what's up in the Community Wellness Center behind the Healthy Home Market in Plaza Midwood at 1330 Central Avenue. So coming up this Wednesday on the 19th, you can come to a Wellness Journey support group. It's free. They'd love to have you join. It's an informal get-together to support each other in your wellness and your growth. And this week's conversation is about glycobiology and supplementation. And then on Thursday, the next night, there's the Raw Vegan Cuisine with Chef Ami L. Third Thursday every month. Third Thursday of the month, you can find out about, maybe changing your lifestyle a little bit with raw and vegan foods. There's going to be preparation, classes, sampling, techniques, and recipes. So come on out for that. It's just $20, includes all the samples, the tips that you need to do it just right, and the recipes that you can go home with. And then on Friday, there's a light therapy lunch and learn in the Community Wellness Center with Samantha Britton, wellness consultant and light educator, for a lunchtime kind of a thing. And also there's, as always, the Aqua Chi Detox Foot Bath with Alicia Ashley on Thursdays and Fridays in the Community Wellness Center. And then Wednesday, looking ahead a little bit to the following week, on the 26th, there's a class called Easing Allergy Symptoms with Energy Medicine. And it's just $25 for the workshop. It's with Arlene Mauney, registered health professional and healing touch practitioner. To check it all out and more discounts and events coming up, we've got a big patio party about to happen for the new patio at the community near the Community Wellness Center, right in front of the new Healthy Home Market. That's in September. Check it out at healthyhomemkt.com. That's healthyhomemkt.com. So back to our topic of the hour, vitamin D and omega-3s, and why they're a big part of your nutritional backbone. Jolie Root joins us by phone from Florida. So thanks so much for being here today, Jolie.
Oh, it's so nice that you invited me. I'm happy to be with you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm honored that you're here today. You know, food has really been turned upside down and inside out, and the basics kind of aren't the basics anymore. It feels like when you go to the store sometimes, your basic average store, there's about 50 toxins in every shopping cart. And not only are the toxins from the food production, but the good things aren't there, like omega-3s. And it's said that Americans have actually the lowest intake of omega-3s of any other developed country, and vitamin D levels are kind of dangerously low. Let's talk about why these two supplements are so critical. What are the big benefits that help to turn around our current nutritional deficiencies?
Well, the omega-3s are important because they support the actual structure of tissue in the body and in practically any organ system that you and I could name. We could play a game and say omega-3s and the joints, and we would be able to talk about multiple benefits, reducing inflammation, lubricating increasing fluid in the joint capsules, or we could say the eyes. The DHA omega-3 is necessary for sharp focus. It's one of the highest concentrations of DHA omega-3 should be in the retina. The brain, about 60% of the brain is fat. 60% of that fat in the brain should be omega-3 DHA. And so when we talk about America being one of the lowest areas of omega-3 intake in the developed world, we realize, well, if the omega-3s are not where they should be in the body, then substitutes are there. The stuff that we do eat is there. So let's say that all you eat is vegetable oil, you're not a fish eater, and you have no intake of something like DHA. Your brain has to use what it has, but the signaling, the communication in the brain cells reduces significantly. So if we use vegetable oils or plant oil, omega-6s, and that's what our brain tissue, the brain cell membranes are comprised of, the nervous system communication in the brain, and this is true in the retina too, is reduced by 1,000-fold compared to what it would be if we were taking in an adequate amount of DHA. So what does that mean? It means that we're dull. It means that we're not as sharp and focused as we need to be. And I think when you look at some of the specific roles for omega-3, stabilizing heart rhythm, reducing elevated triglyceride levels, normalizing blood pressure, regulating the pace of the heart, not just the rhythm, but the strength of the beat, retarding the growth of plaque and fatty streaks in the arteries, reducing inflammation. All of those things are heart benefits that even the American Heart Association concurs are ways that omega-3s reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. So back to the premise, what if we're not getting omega-3? What would be the outcome then if you didn't have those benefits? Well, soaring rates of heart disease, soaring rates of heart attack, elevated cholesterol clogging the blood vessels of people, too much inflammation, which affects not just the heart, but the immune system, the joints, the bones, the lungs, asthma, allergies. So there are fundamental roles that omega-3 play, and vitamin D is right there. The next most well-studied nutrient with thousands of published trials looking at health benefits after omega-3 is vitamin D. They are fundamentally necessary for our bodies to function at optimal health. And what I think, Holly, is that since people don't get enough omega-3 and vitamin D, it explains some of the background disease incidents that we struggle with in America.
That's so fascinating to think that, with omega-3s and vitamin D, that you could really blast out a lot of these various illnesses. And you mentioned the vegetable oil and omega-6s. Give us a little primer, a little tutorial on the difference between 3s and 6s, and there's 9s, and it gets into inflammation. And
the oils are named, these fatty acids, they are named based on some molecular structure, which is interesting for chemists, not so interesting for the audience. But right. Omega-3s in general come from fish and from cereals and things like flaxseed. And when I say cereal, I mean grasses. And the omega-3s are anti-inflammatory in nature. And the most potent, most bioactive members of the omega-3s are the omega-3s derived from fish and seafood. So they're called EPA and DHA. DHA is the hardest one to get, and that's the one that is so necessary for the brain and for vision. Omega-6s come from vegetable oils and from the animals that eat things like corn and soybean. And the omega-6s, while some omega-6 is necessary, too much omega-6 is problematic because too much omega-6 promotes inflammation. Where the omega-3s help to guard against excessive inflammation, the omega-6s promote inflammation and clots forming in the blood and constriction of blood vessels and stiffness in the joints. And so they sort of are counter to one another. And the problem in our culture, one of the nutritional challenges that we face is that we should have roughly even amounts of omega-3 and omega-6. That's what our hunter-gatherer ancestors were taking in. And ideally, you should never have more than 4 times as much omega-6 as omega-3. And in North America, we are more at, better to describe it as 20 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3. So we're way beyond a balance that makes any sense, rationally speaking, where nutrition is concerned. So we have excessive inflammation, excessive clotting, constricted blood vessels with lots of hypertension and other cardiovascular symptoms, and a number of problems associated with just a balance of omega-3 and omega-6 being out of whack. And part of it is because we eat beef and corn and pork and all kinds of farm-raised animals, and instead of them wandering out in the pastures and eating grass like they were designed to do, we raise them on feedlots and feed them corn and soybeans, which are about 70 times higher in omega-6 than omega-3. So our food supply, as we find it in the supermarket today, if we're just eating typical supermarket food, our food supply is grossly out of balance for the omega-6 and omega-3. You mentioned omega-9. Those are found in things like olive oil, almonds, walnuts. The Mediterranean diet is full of a lot of omega-9. And those don't impact the balance of omega-6 and omega-3. And omega-9s are actually considered protective when it comes to heart disease, when it comes to obesity, and when it comes to cancer. So those are good guys, and the omega-3s, particularly the fish-derived omega-3s, are really good guys. The omega-6s wouldn't be bad guys if we ate a much, much less rich diet with omega-6, but when we're 20 times higher in omega-6 to omega-3, we get into trouble.
Yeah, that is just out of control, really. So you're saying then that if you were to buy grass-fed, grass-finished beef, because beef and meat gets a bad rap.
It does, and grass-fed beef is a completely different animal than the feedlot, concentrated animal farming operation, typical supermarket beef.
Right.
So what I'm happy to see, at least here in my market area in Florida, and also when I shop around when I'm traveling around the country, what I'm happy to see is that mainstream supermarkets are starting to put their toe in the water as far as really healthy protein is concerned and carry more grass-fed beef and pork and more high omega-3 eggs. And they cost a little more, but not a lot more. And when you consider that we probably eat too much beef and pork to begin with, if we were to have seafood a few more times a week, and when we do spend money for beef, pork, or those kinds of proteins, spend a little more and get the grass-fed beef, it would make a huge impact on our omega-3 intake. And then if we cook with olive oil, that's an omega-9, so you're not over-consuming omega-6. It's not that hard to bring things back into balance. You just have to be conscious about what you're choosing when you're shopping.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because it really isn't that hard if you just pivot your brain a little bit. You focus differently. And we've got some beef at the Healthy Home Market, and it's really big in this area, in this region of North Carolina, and up into the mountains, up in the Asheville area. There's a beef product called Hickory Nut Gap Grove beef, and it's excellent. And you're right. I think as Americans, we kind of tend to have a big slab of meat and a little bit of potato on the side, when we probably should reverse that, like lots of vegetables and just a small bit of the protein. I want to ask you about just eggs before we move on, because, is it really safe to eat eggs? People are pretty confused about it.
It really is. And in fact, even the American Medical Association, the Dietetic Association, and the Heart Association have reversed their long-standing warnings about eggs being a high source of cholesterol and ingested cholesterol being a risk for heart disease. They now realize that the cholesterol that we eat is not the problem. It's the cholesterol that we manufacture when our bodies are out of metabolic balance, and that eggs are safe to eat, and even eating them daily is safe. That said, again, I like to look for the eggs where the chickens have been fed consciously, so that the eggs are higher in omega-3, because when omega-3s incorporate into the membranes of the brain, for example, they go in there with some other nutrients, things like choline and serine, that are called phospholipids. Egg yolks are a great source of choline and phospholipids, and the omega-3, when the chicken is fed well, when the chicken either gets some algae or some flaxseed along with their fully free-range diet, the omega-3 content in the egg yolks are a rich source of DHA, one of the hardest to get omega-3s, and the content in an egg yolk is phospholipid DHA, which is very bioactive. The body takes that up hungrily, and it inserts itself into those neuronal membranes and really improves the speed of information processing, executive function, memory, focus. So eggs are not only healthy, they're extremely healthy, especially if the chickens are fed well.
Wow, I just want to yell, hallelujah or mazel tov or something, It's just so great to hear this, because eggs are delicious and they're so easy to cook. They're relatively inexpensive. So that is some good news. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to talk some more about this, folks. We're here with Jolie Root, educator, nutritionist, radio personality. We got her here with us today. So stay with us. Keep it locked on Streets 1033.
Medical scientists worldwide are encouraging people to eat more fish. And most American diets are low in important omega-3 oils. Omega-3 oils are the vital components of fish that provide numerous health benefits. Carlson Elite Omega-3 Gems supply concentrated amounts of these omega-3 oils that are needed to support vision, brain function, and a healthy heart. Each great-tasting Carlson Elite Omega-3 Gem Soft Gel contains 1,250 milligrams of fish oil from deep cold water fish. That supplies a full 800 milligrams of omega-3s, all in only one easy-to-swallow soft gel. You can take Carlson fish oils with confidence, for they are tested for purity, potency, and freshness by an independent FDA-registered laboratory. Ask for Carlson Elite Omega-3 Gems at your favorite natural food retailer today.
Novocaine, baby, baby. Novocaine, baby.
Welcome back. Glad you're here today. You're listening to the Healthy Home Hour, sponsored by the Healthy Home Market. I'm your host, Holly Adams, and we're here with Jolie Root talking about vitamin D and omegas and healthy foods. Like eggs are really not only not bad for you, but they're really good for you, particularly, well, especially or only the organic eggs or free-range eggs, the ones that are fed good foods, not GMO and standard soy and corn, but they have a chance to scratch around and eat bugs and be healthy chickens. So there's so much to talk about. I want to ask you also, Jolie, about vitamin D in particular. I'm thinking here it is. It's August. It's mid-August. It's summer. Is there really a need for extra vitamin D for folks?
There is, and now is the perfect time for people to be paying attention to vitamin D. And if you haven't been supplementing with vitamin D, you probably don't have a really excellent level of vitamin D. We get vitamin D from the sunlight, and so a lot of people think that in the summertime, because the sun is so much brighter and we're wearing less and we're out and maybe we get some tan, that we're adequate with vitamin D levels. But another thing that happens in the sunniest part of the year is that people wear sunscreen, and sunscreen blocks the production of vitamin D in the skin. So we need to pay attention to what is actually our level of vitamin D, but most people want to start boosting vitamin D right around now because it takes 2 to 3 months to really pick up our level of vitamin D, and fall and winter are times when you do not want to have a low level of vitamin D, because low levels of vitamin D increase the frequency of and the severity of respiratory infection rates, particularly with kids. The kids are going back to school right now, and schools, I think of schools as germ factories, basically. But
right.
The kids go back to school. One kid comes in with something, every kid touches everything that kid touched. We tell them to wash their hands, but do they really? And the next thing you know, your son or daughter is coming home with some kind of a cold, and or worse than that, the flu, as it gets to be a little bit, farther into the colder months. And low levels of vitamin D dramatically increase the chances that you're going to get the infection if you're exposed to it. So August is the perfect time for people to start paying attention. Little kids, little bitty kids, meaning toddlers, need at least 400 units of supplemental vitamin D daily. And if the kids are out of diapers, we jump up to 1,000 units a day. Adults really need about 4,000 units a day. And then when you have your checkup, you should ask your doctor to measure your vitamin D, because you want to be within a normal range, and there's a broad range of normal, but 30 nanograms per milliliter is the beginning. And kids that are at 30 nanograms per milliliter compared to kids that are down at 15, that's a deficiency level, and that's the national average in the wintertime. Those little kids at 15 have 11 times more respiratory infections than kids that are at 30. So there's a reason why we want to really boost our vitamin D levels when we're looking at the immune system. There are a lot of other reasons too, but the immune system needs vitamin D for those cells to be most powerful fighting things like flu and the common cold and other respiratory type infections. And so now's the time to be thinking about it, not later when the flu season is here.
That's so interesting. It's so funny, isn't it? It's wonderful how nature prepares us for the coming season.
Yes.
I want to ask you, do different people need different levels of vitamin D? In the big range of skin types from dark to light, is there a difference in dosing?
There is. Generally, darker skinned people don't metabolize vitamin D as efficiently either from the diet or from the sun. And so they sometimes need higher doses, and there's this truth about all of us that we are biochemically unique. And that uniqueness, part of that is that a level that might support me to 30 or 40 or 50 nanograms per milliliter might not support you the same way. We are all very individual when it comes to our biochemistry. So that's why I always recommend testing with vitamin D so that we can see where we really are. Most people think, I really do work in the garden a lot. I know I get a lot of sun. I don't wear that much sunscreen. I bet my vitamin D levels are fine. It's a good idea to check that, because a lot of people buy into the idea that the amount of vitamin D in a standard multivitamin supports optimal levels of vitamin D, and it doesn't. There's some confusion between and what the experts suggest, the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Sciences, the people that set the daily values for nutrients are making recommendations on vitamin D that are about 20 years behind the science, unfortunately. So no wonder people get confused, but the only way to really know where you stack up is by getting a blood test.
So is that to say, because people also talk and seem to worry about getting too much vitamin D. It sounds like maybe that's not possible.
It's very difficult. We almost never see it. The normal range for serum vitamin D is between 30 nanograms per milliliter and 100 nanograms per milliliter. And even with levels up at 100 nanograms per milliliter, we don't see the incidence of excessive vitamin D intake. What that would do, if you had high vitamin D levels, the symptoms around that are hypercalcemia. Your calcium levels in the bloodstream would increase to very high levels, and that is a risk for cardiac arrest. So you could see why people would be concerned, but the reality is that even people up at the high end of normal don't have that high calcium effect. So it's possible that even the high end of normal isn't actually an area where a person would be getting into trouble. And the general population is down between 20 and 30. They're not even up into what the vitamin D community feels is the normal range. So it's really unusual to meet somebody that's even in the mid-range for vitamin D levels, say 60 nanograms per milliliter. And there's some reasons to be up at those levels. There's a dramatic reduction in cancer risk when you get to 50 and 60. There is a pretty big reduction in heart attack risk even just being at 30. When you go back to comparing 30 to the wintertime average of 15, people at 30 only have half the risk for heart attack. So again, it pays to know what your level is, because it's, in my opinion, it's dangerous to have a vitamin D level that's down at the U.S. wintertime average.
Is that to say that there's more heart attacks in the winter?
Yes, twice as many.
Wow.
At those levels of vitamin D, and those levels of vitamin D are more likely to be the case in the winter. So I don't know if there are actually more heart attacks in the winter, but you're at double the risk if your vitamin D level is at 15 rather than 30, and 15 is a typical wintertime average in North America. So I bet if we looked at incidence rate, we might find that the colder months are riskier when it comes to heart events.
That's fascinating. This is great info to know and to arm yourself with, folks. We're going to take a short break. We're here with Jolie Root. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Keep it locked at Streets 1033.
No doubt you've heard a lot about the health benefits of vitamin D. Now you can get your vitamin D in a base of the healthiest omega-3s. Carlson Solar D Gems provides both. Carlson Solar D Gems provides 2,000 to 4,000 IU of all natural vitamin D3, a vitamin that many people do not get enough of from the sun alone. In fact, many health experts are now claiming that most Americans are lacking in this important nutrient. Vitamin D3 plays an important role in bone, cardiovascular, and immune health. Plus, Carlson's Solar D Gems also contains the important omega-3 oils that your body needs to support vision, brain function, and a healthy heart. The omega-3s support the absorption of the vitamin D. You get the benefits of both. Carlson's Solar D Gems. Vitamin D in a base of omega-3s. Look for Carlson Solar D Gems at your favorite natural food store today.
Novocaine, baby, baby. Novocaine, baby.
We're back. You're listening to the Healthy Home Hour, and we're talking here today with Jolie Root and some fascinating info about vitamin D levels and how it relates to all kinds of things. I want to get into also, Jolie, the heart. We were talking about it before the break, and what I recall from some reading I did, and I don't remember the guy's name, but I want to bring it up anyway. It was a doctor from Minnesota. I think it was back in the 60s. He started that's kind of where it started, that fats were thought to be bad for us. And it seems like we're still trying to make up for that. And I wondered if you'd just give us a little bit about fats and the heart, because it gets confusing. And there's new reports that indicate that fish oils maybe aren't showing some of the bigger benefits that we thought for the heart. Tease that out a little bit for us.
Well, you're right, and it was in the 60s, and the whole idea that fats were bad for the heart came from the cholesterol theory of heart disease. And in the 60s, one of the antidotes, if you would, to cholesterol, the thinking was, we eat cholesterol, it raises our cholesterol, and that raises our risk of heart attack. So, for starters, that's not correct. Eating cholesterol isn't the thing that raises our cholesterol. Eating cholesterol has kind of a null effect on the cholesterol that puts us at heart risk. We manufacture the cholesterol that puts us at heart risk, and sometimes eating sugar is the thing that does that. So there's something to think about and chew on. Mm-hmm. But the approach for avoiding that whole mistaken construct of eating cholesterol equals higher risk of heart disease was to eat fats that didn't contain cholesterol. And that's where the things like margarine, vegetable oil spreads, Crisco, Mazola, those things came into the marketplace. And the money that was spent to bring that message across, not just on television commercials or in the grocery stores, but also the registered dietitians and the whole nutrition education system bought into the idea that corn oil and butter substitutes were healthier than butter. And so you saw low-fat and even non-fat, the Pritikin Institute, all of these dietary approaches taking people down to much lower intake of fat in order to get a handle and wrestle with this epidemic of heart disease. And it didn't work. And what happened was it came around the mid-1980s. It came to be seen that margarine was actually 9 times more atherogenic than butter. So these trans fats, because that's what they did, they stabilized liquid vegetable oils so that they would stay solid at room temperature. So think Crisco and think margarine. And what that did was it changed the nature of those oils so that the body doesn't really recognize it. And those trans fats were extremely dangerous for cardiovascular health. So we were on the wrong path for a really long time. And then the acknowledgement that trans fats were a problem came down the pike. So then we blamed saturated fats. And we still were blaming butter because butter was high in saturated fats. And then we started blaming eggs, too, because there were saturated fats in eggs. And there may be some relevance to keeping saturated fats to not an excessive intake, but we still now know that butter is better than margarine and that eggs are fine to eat. And somewhere around the late 1970s, the work began to be done with the fish oils, because right around 1970, 1971, 72, a Danish researcher, Jorn Dyerberg, went to Greenland and studied the Inuits there who were eating blubber, seal, and whale fat. Their diets were 90% fat, but that fat was predominantly the omega-3s that were found in cold water fish also. Omega-3s don't freeze, so when you look at the creatures that live in the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle, the fats in their body are really high in omega-3, and it keeps those animals from freezing in those frigid waters. So Dr. Dyerberg was perplexed. How could someone eat such a high-fat diet and not be experiencing heart disease, because they weren't. The Greenland Eskimos, the Inuits were not having heart attack and stroke like North Americans were or Europeans were, even though they were eating 90% fat. Well, those fats, those omega-3s, are unsaturated, and they do not clog the arteries. They do the reverse. So what we learned was, it's not about high fat or low fat. It's not about saturated fat as much as it is about high quality fat and more of the omega-3 long chain polyunsaturated fats, and then the omega-9 monounsaturated fats like olive oil and almonds and walnuts and macadamia nuts. So we've come a long way with our understanding about fats, and we now know that good fats are healthy, and in fact, adding more good fats to the diet actually dramatically reduces the likelihood of heart disease. About the second part of your question, which is some recent studies that haven't found benefit for fish or fish oils, there are a couple of reasons why. Some of the studies only use a very small amount of fish oil, and we now know we can quantify how much EPA and DHA from fish oil it takes to dramatically reduce risk of things like sudden cardiac death. And it takes between 1,200 and 2,000 milligrams a day to get to a point where your blood levels of omega-3 are high enough that you get a 90% reduction in risk compared to people whose blood levels are very low, compared to the general population. So a 90% reduction in risk of sudden cardiac death, that's a big benefit. Why don't some of the more recent studies show that? Because they're only using doses of 300 milligrams. And because in some cases both groups are eating fish, the background intake of omega-3 is the same in the intervention group as it is in the control group, so you see no difference. It's like if you were testing a medicine but both groups were taking the same medicine, the results in both groups would be the same, so you might be confused by that outcome. The other thing is some of the most recent studies have been a kind of study called a meta-analysis, where the author of the study chooses to include some of the data but not all of the data around a question. And there have been some studies where I really think that the intention was to throw people off of the notion that fish oils are as healthy as they are. And you think, why would anyone do a study like that?
Right.
Well, maybe they are being sponsored by drug companies who stand to lose if the population doesn't need their products. That does happen with meta-analysis. Sometimes people set out to damage the understanding about something like vitamin E or omega-3 because they have ties to the pharmaceutical world and they don't like the notion that we could be healthy without their drugs.
It's shocking. I mean, even though I hear about this all the time and see it in my own research and stuff, it still is shocking to think about creating something that would, in a meta-analysis that would throw such confusion and obfuscation into the whole mix that when you're talking about public health, it's astounding. Well, so, this meta-analysis, when you say meta-analysis, what does that mean exactly? Because I'm thinking also, you mentioned earlier iatrogenic or iatrogenic illness. Explain what that is, because they seem to kind of tie in together.
Well, a meta-analysis is when statisticians take evidence and try to come to some conclusions about it. So they might go out and look. There are 27,000 studies on omega-3, EPA, and DHA that have been published. And that number's changing every year, so it's going to be higher a year from now. So if a statistician decided that they wanted to take a look at whether or not fish consumption or fish oil consumption benefited heart disease, let's say, and this is the case, if you look at the last 5 years or so, there have been 14 randomized controlled trials. That's trials where there were treatment group and placebo group. It was blinded, meaning each group didn't know whether they were getting the treatment or the placebo, and other factors were ruled out for. So these are considered gold standard in medical research, randomized controlled trials. The 14 trials involving almost 35,000 individuals actually found that the supplement of omega-3s in patients with heart disease exert beneficial effects in reducing death from cardiac causes, in reducing sudden cardiac death, and death from all causes. Now, that was a meta-analysis, but the people who designed that study, and it was published last year in a journal called Nutrition and Metabolic Cardiovascular Disease, they designed their study using the trials that found benefit and that had large numbers of participants and that were well controlled for things like background omega-3 intake and other factors. You could take a meta-analysis. If you've got 27,000 studies to work with,
right.
Not all of those are on heart disease. Some of those are on brain issues. Some of those are on joint issues. Some of those are on allergies or rheumatoid arthritis. But if you've got several thousand studies to deal with heart disease, you could just decide not to include the ones where benefit was seen. If you were a person who wanted your outcome to be that fish oils didn't benefit the heart, all you need to do is go find those trials where they used doses that were very small or that were only done for, say, 8 weeks instead of 6 months or a year. You could rule out the good studies, include the bad studies, and come up with a very different finding. And that's why meta-analysis can throw a monkey wrench into the conversation around fish oils.
Well,
Here's a good example.
Okay.
Somebody did a study a couple of years ago on selenium and vitamin E and prostate cancer. The gentleman had prostate cancer. There were some that had less aggressive forms and some that had more aggressive forms, and they intervened with vitamin E or a combination of selenium and vitamin E to see if those two things or one or the other of those things was beneficial in men with prostate cancer. Now, they took blood draws at the beginning of that study. So last year, someone with an interest in discrediting fish oils in men with prostate cancer came along, used the blood that's frozen, those samples, and ran omega-3 indexes, ran omega-3 levels, and these were blood draws from the beginning of the study. And then they calculated the difference between some of the men's omega-3 level and some of the other men's, and they were all, omega-3 levels were very low. They were so low that it did not indicate that those men had been taking fish oil before that study. And during the study, no one took fish oil. They were not given fish oil. But there was a little bit of a difference, and I mean less than a single percentage point difference in omega-3 levels. In fact, it was about 0.3 percentage point between the less aggressive cancer patients and the more aggressive cancer patients. And oddly enough, the slightly higher omega-3 level occurred in the more aggressive cancer patients. It was such a minute difference that it could have been a single fish meal that those men had right before the study started. In other words, they weren't taking fish oil, and none of them had a high intake of fish or fish oil. But what that researcher published was that fish oil is dangerous. Fish oil supplements are dangerous for men with prostate cancer.
Oh my goodness, this is
now,
yeah.
It made men question whether they should be taking fish oil at all.
Sure.
When the actual randomized controlled trials where men have been given fish oil who had prostate cancer, the findings were that the fish oil was protective. The cancers were less aggressive after the men got the fish oil. So the researcher, based on blood samples that were before the study that might have only been the difference of a single fish meal and no intake of fish oil during the study, the researcher comes out with a conclusion saying fish oils are harmful for men with prostate cancer. So you see, that's just an out-and-out assassination attempt, if you will, on the good reputation of omega-3 by a researcher who has an agenda for some reason to say that, fish oils are not all that great.
Yeah, you wonder. I mean, that's so discouraging to hear that, and not totally shocking, but discouraging. And then, all these other meta-analyses that go on. What other things are we not getting proper information on? So thanks for teasing that out, for helping us understand how that really works, because you think, people think, there's conspiracy theories, and then there's the anti-conspiracy theory, and then it just goes on and on and on, So thanks. We're going to take just another short break. We'll be right back, folks. Don't go away. We're talking to Jolie Root here today on the Healthy Home Hour.
Have you had your Carlson Norwegian fish oil today? Decades ago, scientists discovered why Greenland Eskimos maintain healthy hearts despite their high-fat diets. The high level of omega-3 oils in their seafood diet protected their hearts. Carlson Norwegian fish oil provides those important omega-3 oils. The same omega-3s from cold water fish support maximum brain power, immune strength, joint comfort, and our vision too. Carlson, the very finest fish oil, is a valuable source of the important omega-3s EPA and DHA. Each teaspoon provides a full 1,600 milligrams of omega-3s. And its purity is guaranteed. Try it on salads and popcorn. It tastes like lemon, not fishy. As for Carlson, the very finest fish oil, at finer health food stores today.
Novocaine, baby, Novocaine, baby.
Hey, glad you're with us today. You're listening to the Healthy Home Hour. We're having a very interesting conversation today about how the backstory even about omega-3s and vitamin D. And I wanted to ask you, Jolie, there's also some very interesting research that has come out at the Children's Hospital in Oakland, and the synergy of omega-3 and vitamin D on serotonin, which, of course, gets into depression and behavioral issues, which, too often lead to despair and possibly go into violence. And there's something like 1 in 4 people as an average that are on antidepressants in the country. Tell us about that. What happened? Why is it so great? What is it doing to the brain?
Well, we produce all of these neurotransmitters from dietary compounds, and we usually think of the amino acids, the building blocks of protein, when we think about things like serotonin. Tryptophan is the amino acid that we know gets metabolized into serotonin in the brain. Well, these researchers at Children's Hospital came to realize that in order to activate an enzyme that produces serotonin in the brain, and the enzyme is called tryptophan hydroxylase 2. There are a couple of tryptophan hydroxylases. One of them, the first one, produces body serotonin. The tryptophan hydroxylase 2 in the brain controls the production of brain serotonin. The researchers were researching autistic children who have low brain serotonin but often normal body serotonin. And we know that these neurotransmitters exist in the gut, sometimes in quantities, in the GI that are larger than the amounts that are in the brain. Well, these researchers were able to identify that the serotonin production in the brain, that enzyme, tryptophan hydroxylase 2, is regulated, is activated by the hormone version of vitamin D, which is called calcitriol. And that's the activated vitamin D, the most active kind of vitamin D. When we take vitamin D, we have sort of a vitamin D bank account in the body of circulating vitamin D levels. That's what we measure when we do a vitamin D test. That's called 25-OHD. That's the circulating vitamin D that is the store from which we can activate the hormone calcitriol. Well, calcitriol is necessary then for the production of serotonin. It activates the enzyme that takes tryptophan and turns it into serotonin. So if you have very low vitamin D levels, you're not making serotonin. And the relevance of that with autism is that autistic children have the finding is that most of them have low brain serotonin, and that actually impacts the child's ability to connect. And autistic kids don't make eye contact, they're very withdrawn, but even normal individuals with low serotonin levels are seen to have higher rates of antisocial behavior, increased aggression, even self-injury. So when they went back and took a bigger look at the regulation of serotonin, the researchers found that EPA omega-3 influences the release of serotonin across the synapses in the brain, and that DHA improves the receptor function. There are these embedded receptors for serotonin in the nerve cell membranes in the brain. So the EPA sends the serotonin, the DHA improves the reception of serotonin, and the vitamin D hormone, calcitriol, upregulates the production of serotonin. So now if we circle back to the beginning of our conversation where we talk about population-wide deficiency of vitamin D and Americans having the lowest intake of omega-3, EPA, and DHA in the developed world, we can sort of think to ourselves, well, gee, if you just looked at serotonin, if you look at depression, if you look at bipolar disorder, attention deficit, schizophrenia, impulsive behavior, violent behavior, uncontrolled aggression, all of those things are related to serotonin. And if we have bankruptcy levels of omega-3 and vitamin D, no wonder we see all of these things as so prevalent in our culture.
Yes, it really, it sparks a whole bunch of thoughts about what's going on in the country now in the last few years. Do you see any indication that hospitals and psychiatrists may incorporate, or are they? Do you know of more omega-3s and vitamin D into?
Well, certainly, after the publication of these two papers, the researchers Ames and Patrick, they published the autism paper a year ago in February, and the attention deficit, bipolar, schizophrenia, depression paper this year in February. And it's been in the headlines, and I do think that we'll see an embracing from the psychiatric community. I know I go to a lot of medical conferences and stand there and talk about research on omega-3 and vitamin D and other nutrients, and usually it's Carlson, a vitamin company, and I'm there on behalf of them, and then the rest of the room is full of drug companies. And the doctors come up and they tell me to a person, I test vitamin D levels, and I find that until I prescribe vitamin D, my patients' levels are deficiency levels. And I say, well, you might also want to test omega-3 levels, and you certainly want to consider the relevance of the combination of the two, whether we're talking about inflammation or whether we're talking now about these behavior and mood disorders. And the doctors, I think, are very open-minded to this. And whether it's the lipid meetings, and those guys are all looking at cholesterol and triglycerides and the things that block the bloodstream, or whether it's the meetings of the people that are in the Endocrine Society, and they're looking at obesity, but they're also looking at rheumatoid arthritis and other issues like that. Depending upon the group, their interests might be a little different, but even the midwives are very savvy about vitamin D and omega-3, and we've presented at the American Academy of Nurse Midwives many times over the last decade or so at their annual meeting, at their scientific sessions with the science, so that they understand the importance of these things. So one of the roles that I do for Carlson is go out and educate doctors, and I'm really grateful that the company supports me in doing that.
Oh, I'm so glad you're doing that. How about for cognitive decline in older folks, or dementia and Alzheimer's?
Well, what we see is that these things are better used ahead of that than once the decline is in place, particularly with Alzheimer's. We don't find as much of a benefit intervening once the person is really into the symptomatic reality of Alzheimer's as we do in reducing the things that are associated with Alzheimer's beforehand. So the things that we do that reduce the likelihood of us being diabetic or having heart disease when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s are exactly the things that dramatically reduce the likelihood that we will have dementia or Alzheimer's when we get into our 70s, 80s, and 90s. The time to act is ahead of the onset of loss of cognitive function. And there are so many things to talk about. The DHA reduces amyloid burden, and amyloid is the protein from which the plaque in the Alzheimer's brain is made of. And adding DHA to mouse food in mice with Alzheimer's actually shrunk the plaques. We haven't had such great results in adding high amounts of omega-3 to Alzheimer's patients' dietary regimen as we have in animal studies. But we do see in populations of people who have higher DHA and higher omega-3 intake as adults and middle-aged adults a big reduction in incidence of Alzheimer's. So the time to act is before the danger has presented itself, before you've been diagnosed.
Right.
It's never too late to start with omega-3, but if you're in a situation where you have Alzheimer's and the symptoms are pretty advanced, it's less likely that these things are going to be beneficial.
Right. I mean, really talking about prevention. How about, how do these two supplements, omega-3s and vitamin, I'm nervous about doing this. My doctor doesn't know anything about it. And how can I take them along with my medication? I'm not sure.
Well, they actually are really well suited for taking along with medication. The omega-3s in particular, especially when you're talking about the heart medications, there have been some really well-designed studies looking at taking either a combination of EPA and DHA along with cholesterol-lowering medications or just a high dose of EPA by itself. And what they found is that the patients respond more favorably to the cholesterol-lowering medications when they take fish oils with them. So in a population of people with heart disease, if they just took statins, for example, the cholesterol-lowering medications, you get about a 20% reduction in cardiovascular incident rate. With fish oils and statins combined, you get about double that benefit.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yes, and with vitamin D, it's well known that the cholesterol-lowering medications create muscle pain and soreness and sometimes joint pain and soreness. And they did an interesting study where they looked at people that were having these musculoskeletal complaints. When they took statins, they were having a lot of pain. And they measured their vitamin D levels, and they found that the higher their pain scores, the more likely it was that they actually had deficiency levels of vitamin D. And when they corrected the deficiency, when they gave them vitamin D and brought them up into adequacy on vitamin D levels, their muscle pain went away even though they stayed on their cholesterol-lowering medications. So
fascinating. We
don't see a conflict. We usually see an additional benefit with the nutrients.
How about, so you're talking about, this is helpful for not only psychiatric issues, serotonin uptake and reception in the brain, also for the heart. You mentioned the joint issues, eyesight. You mentioned, it helps the retina, affecting the eyesight. And I suppose before you go, I have to ask you, because so many people want to know, how about the hair, skin, and nails? Does it help that?
Well, they are not as directly related to hair, skin, and nails. Definitely the skin has vitamin D benefits the skin. You're less likely to sunburn with adequate levels of vitamin D. You tan faster. And that got my teenager on it immediately. But the bigger benefit for hair, skin, and nails would be something like biotin and the B vitamins, and there are other nutrients that we could mention that are probably a little bit more relevant for hair, skin, and nails.
Okay.
But the thing that we haven't talked about is the importance of both vitamin D and omega-3 during pregnancy for people that are planning a family, wanting to, and this is great for grandparents to hear this, because, your daughter or your daughter-in-law doesn't just need to take a prenatal, they need to test vitamin D level and take at least 200 milligrams of DHA daily, and that's for every baby. So if she's carrying twins or triplets, it's times 2 or times 3. Throughout the pregnancy, there are some very, very good studies finding higher IQ, less likelihood of these learning challenges with vitamin D, health benefits that persist all the way out into the 20s and 30s, lower rates of diabetes, lower rates of heart disease. So pregnancy is a time to pay really careful attention to our nutritional status.
That is wonderful, because that's really getting started off on the right foot. And I thank you so much. And before you go, just how much omega-3 should someone take every day?
Well, I usually recommend for children 600 milligrams combined EPA DHA, and for adults 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams combined EPA DHA. So read your fish oil and see how much of that is EPA and DHA. That's what you're looking for. If the adult has very high triglyceride levels, you'll find that when you get blood work done, then it's 4,000 milligrams per day. That's what a doctor would recommend. With vitamin D, for adults, start at 4,000 units a day, and you may need a little more. For toddlers and infants, 400 units, and beyond toddler up to adolescents, 1,000 units of vitamin D.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jolie. Thanks for being here with this wealth of info that you've shared. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Great. We'll do it again. So, folks, get to the Healthy Home Market. There's omega-3s and vitamin D. As you can see, as you can hear, they're a must for your health and your wellness regimen. So come on in, talk with our wellness consultants, and confirm some stuff that you've learned today so you know exactly which ones to get. There's Solar D Gems and Elite Omega-3s and lots of other good things by Carlson, a 50-year-old company out there doing good things for you, creating products that will keep you well. So until next Sunday, I'll see you at the market. Pay it forward and restore yourself by making the healthy choices for you and your family, and enjoy life with the Healthy Home Market. Feel the goodwill and own great health. Check it out at healthyhomemkt.com. That's healthyhomemkt.com for store locations, details, and discounts. Get the best of God's green blue earth at the Healthy Home Market.